When I was in third grade, I wrote a note. It was on a piece of loose leaf paper. And the note I wrote said this: "Dear Cindy, I like you, Steve." I folded it up about 8 times, put Cindy's name on the outside, and raised my hand and asked if I could sharpen my pencil. And when given permission, I conveniently passed by where Cindy was sitting and slid the note onto her desk. I sharpened my pencil and returned to my desk and then waited for the moment of truth. She sat a few desks behind me, so every once in a while I would casually look back for the opportunity to exchange glances. And the first couple of times I looked back, she was looking elsewhere. But then finally came the moment when our eyes locked and she smiled. Oh my goodness, my little third grade heart began to melt. Later at recess, we stared at each other from a distance, and after school, I got up the nerve to catch up to her as she walked home. My legs putty, my mouth dry. We probably said 3 words to each other, but the romance of the century was on its way. 3 weeks later, we were through when Mike Grimmer captured her heart. Love is not an easy game. Love is not an easy game, especially when you are trying to find the love of your life. Notes get passed, kisses get stolen by the jungle gym, jittery fingers dial the phone for the first date, hands get held in the movie theater, gifts get given, dances get danced, knees get bent, and hands get asked for in marriage. It's a tough road, this thing called love, eros love, that is. Eros love is this capturing love. It's a love that sneaks up on you. We call it falling in love for good reason, for it happens to us like tripping over a crack in the sidewalk. Nothing planned, it just happens to you, and there's not much you can do about it. But there is much that it does to you. Eros has its way of flooding our brooks and overflowing our banks. It has its way of taking over. There is no subject over which songs have been sung and poems have been written more so than the gift of Eros love. "How do I love thee," wrote Elizabeth Barrett Browning to her lover. "How do I love thee? Let me count the ways. Oh, my love is like a red, red rose that's newly sprung in June," wrote the old Scottish poet. "Oh, my love is like the melody that's sweetly played in tune. Something in the way she moves attracts me like no other lover," sang the Beatles. "Something in the way she woos me." And of course, Shakespeare's sonnets, "Being your slave, what should I do but tend upon the hours and times of your desire? I have no precious time at all to spend, nor services to do till you require." And then even from our text this morning, "As an apple tree among the trees of the woods, so is my beloved among young men. With great delight I sat in his shadow, and his fruit was sweet to my taste. He brought me to the banqueting house, and his intention toward me was love." There is no more capturing love, and for most there is no greater yearning than to find the love of your life, the love of body, mind, and spirit, the love of partnership, the love of a soulmate, the love of physical attraction, the love of kindred spirits, the love of eternal joining. And when it comes, there is nothing more deeply and personally felt and nothing more difficult to explain. Everyone's need for a partner is different. There's a lid for every pot, the saying goes. No one can explain the love that one person has for another. God knows why the love of my life said yes to me some 39 years ago, but thank God she did. Such a mystery. You and I can look at another couple and wonder, what in heaven's name do they see in each other? But it's not up to us to judge, nor to evaluate, nor even to express our opinion upon. For the truth is, over the history of God's people, the understanding of eros and the understanding of romance and the understanding of covenant and the understanding of marriage have seismically changed. For the longest time in Scripture, the idea of the love of your life was so different than it is today. Many of the great heroes of the Old Testament had more than one wife. King Solomon, the namesake of our biblical book today, had 700 wives and 300 concubines, and still the Bible editors named a book after him. Of course, the idea of mutuality in marriage was something unheard of back then. Women were considered more property than partners, subject to the whims of their husbands. Jesus was considered radical to suggest that men should see in a woman more a soulmate to be cherished than chattel to be exchanged. But even then, for the next couple thousand years, it was still men with the upper hand. It took a long time for the idea of mutuality in love to take hold. And even so, this idea of mutual, romantic, eros, covenantal love can meet up still with objections from family, from friends, from church, from government. When my mother and father fell hopelessly in love back in 1945 and in a couple of short months decided to get married, my grandfather, my mother's father, was none too pleased. His biggest objection outside the rush to the altar was that she was marrying a soon-to-be minister. God forbid. Couldn't you marry a banker, a doctor, a lawyer, but not some poor preacher? Love is love. Eros is eros, and buried in a box of family papers, I still have the letter she wrote to her father explaining all the reasons why he was the man of her dreams. How do I love thee? Let me count the ways. Love defies all logic, defies all prohibition. When my spiritual hero, C.S. Lewis, a confirmed bachelor most of his life, began to correspond with an American woman, Joy Davidman, back in the early 50s, a former communist she, a former atheist, soon to be divorcee, what he didn't know was that with each letter he received from her, quite strangely, quite miraculously, an affection was beginning to grow. And when she came to visit, the affection grew further. And when she moved to England, it grew further. And when she was diagnosed with bone cancer, he realized that he had fallen in love with her. Him in his mid-50s, and for the first time falling in love. Would you marry me, he asks at her hospital bedside. Yes, she says. The only problem was that she had been divorced, and the Church of England prohibited marriage of those who had been divorced. But they were in love, and this poor woman was dying. Couldn't God give them this gift of marriage before the end of her days? Lewis visited the bishop and presented his case, and the bishop said, no, a rule's a rule. We have found the technicality big enough to stand in the way of your consummating the gift you feel so deeply inside and which you believe God has given you. So Lewis, the great giant of the church, visits a local priest, a friend of his, Peter Bide, and begs him to preside over the sacred vows they wish to take to be married in the eyes of God. And at the risk of his ecclesiastical career, Reverend Bide steps outside the bounds of canon law and pronounces them husband and wife in the eyes of God. How could you do otherwise? How could you deny the sacred journey of eros love? There is such mystery, isn't there, in this tense and deeply personal gift that God gives us in eros. There's no explaining it. There's no dissecting it. There's no analyzing it. It's just something that happens. It's something that captures. It's something that envelops. And the Church of Jesus puts a liturgy around it and says that when two souls fall in love and wish to form a covenantal union and pursue the long and winding road of two becoming one, that it is a most sacred thing. And it's holy, isn't it? Eros is not casual. It's not random. Eros isn't just because it feels good. Eros is intimate. It's vulnerable. It is holy ground. When we join ourselves to another in body, mind, and spirit, we are entering the sacred space of another human being. We welcome, at least we should then, the blessed presence of the author of love. We invite God to join us in our longing and in our bonding. And yet, as mysterious and as sacred as such longing is, we still manage to find ways to stand in its way. It wasn't until 1967, for example, when most of America, even most of the church, was still saying to interracial couples that no sacred love could therein exist. It wasn't until 1967 that the Supreme Court of the land stepped in and said that such prohibitions are inhuman, that they take away the right that God intends to express and make sacred this eros gift between any person of any race, this expression of authentic mutuality and covenantal partnership. And because this gift of God is so sacred, so personal, so mysterious, and because we have let too easily in the past our prejudices blind us to the human and spiritual yearnings of others, the church is beginning to see that when folks of the same gender are captured by such love, who are we to stand in the way of allowing them this loving journey of partnership and union? For it is not good for the human to be alone, God says back in the first chapter of the first book of the Bible. It's not good to keep a soul from joining with another soul to experience the fullest measure of authentic partnered love of body, mind, and spirit. That the joy and comfort I take for granted is a joy and comfort that God intends for every human being who is granted the gift of another soul with whom to be one. For we all need someone, don't we, to join us in the journey, to partner with us down life's uncertain path. Makes me think of the story of Jim McKay. Jim McKay, the famous sports broadcaster who died several years ago, told of the fact, this astonishing fact, that this famous broadcaster, Jim McKay, who looked so calm and cool and composed on camera as he reported to us some of the great moments in sports history, that this man who seemed to have it all together on the screen suffered from a profound anxiety before the camera. He was embarrassed about his short stature and what he considered his below-average looks. It led to a nervous breakdown when he was young. And after about a year of recovery, McKay used to say that from then on, whenever he stood before the camera to face the millions and millions of people who were tuning in, he would not let himself think about the millions. The only person he thought of was his wife. It was his only way of getting through a broadcast, pretending that the only person he was talking to was his partner, a conversation with his beloved Margaret. Holy ground. And it's that holy ground, isn't it, that God from the very beginning has wanted for his children, for them to know that they're not alone, that there is someone in the crowd, the big, big crowd, who returns our gaze with a smile, who cheers for us from the other side, who still sets our soul aflutter. So I remember the time when my granddaddy died, the man who was so worried about the poor preacher as a son-in-law and who came later to love him and welcome him and respect him. We got the news of his death and made our way down from Michigan to Pennsylvania for his funeral. And the day before the funeral, we spent the better part of the afternoon and evening at the funeral home greeting well-wishers, as was the custom back then. Granddaddy had a lot of friends and colleagues from town where he had lived all his life, except when he was away in the trenches in France during the Great War. It was quite a crowd in that funeral home, and I remembered most of those people from a few years before when they had come to celebrate the 50th anniversary of grandfather and grandmother, Bob and Josephine. And I remember when the evening drew to a close and the crowd had all gone to their homes and the last visitors had paid their respects, that there was just us family there, and we all gathered at the casket to say goodbye for the last time. And after a moment, we all stepped away to give Josephine her time with her beloved. And for a moment, she stood alone, glancing at the man with whom she had first exchanged glances over a half-century before. And then it was her hand that so gently laid on his folded hands, those hands that had enfolded hers so long before. And then a pat goodbye. Out of all the crowd, just one soul, one pat, one goodbye. So we pass our notes, steal our kisses, hold our hands, bend our knees, and ask for forever. For Eros has come and filled our brooks and flooded our banks, and led us to the one who will join us, and with God's help join to us, the one who will become one with us, the one who each day will say hello, and one day say goodbye.